So my name is Daniel Normandin. I'm the director of a research center on the circular economy based at École de Technologie Supérieure, an engineering school in Montreal. And I'm also the executive director of the Quebec Research Network on the circular economy, which regroups about 230 researchers from Quebec, but also from abroad. It's a pleasure for me to be here, an honor as well to moderate this session. So there are several possible angles from which to approach and accelerate circularity and stimulate innovations. It can be done from the angle of specific resources, for example, lithium, which is, as you know, very popular these days. It can be through a specific value chain or sector which uses a multitude of resources, and it can also be done on a regional scale where flows can be optimized. Whatever the angle, one of the crucial elements is the mobilization of the stakeholders concerned. So during this session, we will present a few inspiring mobilization initiatives, explore their barriers and levers, as well as their replicability. So to tackle this, we have 5 excellent panelists who will, take it in turns to briefly present their initiative in about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A among us, but also with the floor. So this is the program. So our first speaker is Jacomien van Tonder. She's a director of Metal Tech Alley, located in the Lower Columbia region in British Columbia. Jacomien. I guess you can use your microphone.
For the
clicker. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Jacomien van Tonder. I'm the director of Metal Tech Alley. Metal Tech Alley is supporting businesses and professionals to become circular economy leaders in supply chains and bringing the benefits of circular economy to our region. Where is Metal Tech Alley? I get that all the time. We're right in the middle between Calgary and Vancouver, so either way is good for me. We're very close to the US border, which is very important in the business decisions where we are. And I can say that our closest Costco is actually in the US, not in Canada. From a circular economy perspective, we have a very unique ecosystem. It starts with a linear economy with mining and manufacturing that ends up in a circular economy with recycling of those products and putting it back in a smelter. A great example is lead. Lead is the most recycled product in the world, and 99% of a lead car battery gets recycled, and we do it in trail. We have Tech Metals trail operations in our community, one of the world's largest fully integrated zinc and lead smelting and refining complexes. We have 2 recycling facilities called KC Recycling and Serba Solutions. They recycle car batteries, lithium, as well as primary lithium batteries. The lead and the acid that comes from the recycling process goes back to Tech, and they put it back into the smelter. KC Recycling is the largest lead acid battery recycler in Western Canada, and they are in trail. They are also the biggest one in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and that's why I say that our proximity to the US border is very important, because that's where the feed comes from and sometimes goes back into. So that's the lead that I was talking about. They extract the lead out of the process, and then it goes back into the system, and it becomes another car battery in a few years. They're also now recycling a polypropylene extrusion line, which can produce up to 10,000 metric tons of high-quality plastic resin annually. In the coming years, I expect to double or triple the production by incorporating new post-consumer plastic products such as car seats, paint buckets, and more lead battery casings. So that's, you see that one with the pink card at, you can probably see that I like pink, so that one is me. And we're actually, those are the plastic, that was a car battery case before it became those plastic casings. Serba Solutions, they are recycling lithium, primary lithium batteries. So what they do at the site in Trail is they do the disassembly, the collection, advanced sorting, lithium metal processing, lithium primary processing, and lithium ion processing. They've been in Trail since 1993. The first lithium ion battery, get this, has been processed in 1996. Who knew that lithium batteries has been around that long? And the first EV battery process that was recycled in Trail was 2004. So this has been going on for a long time. So far, they've processed over 8.6 million kilograms of lithium-ion batteries in Trail. They do receive all kinds of batteries from the BC Battery Stewardship Program, which they then take to where it needs to go to be recycled. Another interesting industrial circular economy story is, there's lots of batteries there being recycled, is Phoenix Advanced Materials. So they will take byproducts from tech, which is actually for them a waste product. They will further refine it and use it wherever it's applicable. So I'm talking about stuff like cadmium, indium, tin, antimony, tellurium. That type of thing is what they use. They further refine it, it goes into semiconductors, chips, and that. So it's not a waste anymore, suddenly it's useful. They are looking at a new project and where they will take some anodes and cathodes from tech and add some, and this is very technical. You cannot ask me questions about that afterwards because I will not be able to answer them, but I can tell you what I know. So there's anodes and there's cathodes from tech. There's tellurium that gets added to this, which will then eventually, hopefully with the help of UBCO, be a new EV battery. We also have a black crystal project, Eagle Graphite, one of the critical minerals on the federal government's critical minerals list. And they also have a new project, which you can also not ask me afterwards, but they want to use a powdered silicon, which they add with the graphite to develop a new EV battery, and they're also working with the very, very intelligent people at UBCO to do that. So what's next for Metaltech Ali is we've looked at this circular economy and we've looked at batteries, and we realized we can make a battery circular economy in Trail. We are in the middle of a feasibility study, which was funded by the province of BC, thank you. And hopefully by the end of the year, we will know exactly what we need and what we have the capacity to do to set up Metaltech Ali and the Trail region as the battery hub for Western Canada. So if any one of you has got lots of money that you don't know what to do with, and you want to be in the Western Canada, or you are in the west of Canada, you can speak to me. I'll know exactly what to do with your money. Thank you for listening to me today, and I will hand it over to Darren.
So our next speaker is David Messer. David is the Executive Director of the Guelph Smart Cities Office in Guelph, Ontario, and his topic will be about Guelph Wellington Circular Economy Living Lab.
Perfect.
David?
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thanks so much to everyone for coming, and it's great to see so many friendly, familiar faces here today. It feels like summer camp. If we haven't met before, my name is Dave Messer. I'm the Exec Director of the City of Guelph Smart Cities Office. Since about 2020, Guelph and Wellington County have been working on a circular economy project focused on building a regional circular food economy. And this started with a federal grant from the Smart Cities Challenge that really kicked all of this off, and full credit to Barb Schwartzentruber, who's over there, who's really the visionary behind so much of this work that we've been doing in Guelph. But this project really started with 3 core goals. Increasing access to affordable, nutritious food by 50%, creating 50 new circular businesses, and then increasing the economic value by unlocking the value of waste. So we started looking at it like this with about sort of 12 projects identified. As of last year, it looked something like this. And where we're at now, there's about 80 different projects that we can point to coming out of this, working with over 300 businesses. And so it's kind of grown and scaled in a whole range of different ways in the past few years. And the reason for that is because this is really a whole of community project. Being in the Smart Cities office, we're fortunate to be in that hub where, you know, we have a nice big pot of money from the federal government to distribute, but so much of the ideas, the inspiration, the insights for this project come from all of our community collaborators. We're working with all of the different innovation centers in our region. We're working with 37 different food relief organizations, academics at the University of Guelph, NGOs from across the country. So this really is, you know, not just us by any means. It's this whole group that's coming together with ideas, sharing ideas together, and then really using that and some resources from the feds to come up with new solutions. So I want to tell you about a few things that we're doing and give you a couple examples of projects that I think are exciting. But first, I want to go back to sort of where we started a little bit. And we first had to start by understanding what is our food environment. The back of this slide is actually from an AI system we developed with a company called Eagle Vision and piloted. It didn't end up happening because that company got acquired, but it really speaks to sort of what cities control now. So if you think of what cities do in the food system, it's really kind of just solid waste, and it's just on the residential side. So, you know, we worked to develop some innovative solutions there, including this AI to actually get real-time data on what the waste coming out of households looks like, but there's a whole lot more to the food system than just that, obviously. So we worked with the great people at Dillon and Metabolic, and in 2020 and 2021 completed this Sankey diagram of our regional food system. And I think most people have seen these at various times today already, so I probably don't need to explain that. You kind of go left to right, and that shows down the supply chain, and that box kind of represents downstream where some of that food can actually be eaten. So a few things just to point out. Obviously, you know, in terms of volume, most of what we have that's produced in Wellington County are around those fruits and vegetables. And you can see huge amount of waste as you go down that stream. So if you started with 24 potatoes at the top, by the time you get to that downstream box, you only have about 12 potatoes left. Half that's been lost in the supply chain. But then when you get beyond that, we know households typically waste about a third of what they buy. So really only about 8 potatoes of those 24 actually get eaten. So when we're thinking about waste downstream, if you look at number 2, you can see about 2/3 of the waste from households ends up going to compost, which is not great, but it's not the worst option. However, if you look at hotels, restaurants, and institutes and sort of the retail, you can see all of that business food waste goes straight to landfill. So that's a systems gap right there that you can see from this. But all of that downstream food waste is completely dwarfed when you look at number 3, which is all of the upstream food waste, which comes from either planned or unplanned processing loss, so things like byproducts, or loss in storage and packaging. So using this data and then some other data sets that we developed in our community, we started to implement and see how we could intervene here. And a lot of these were sort of pilots focused at the systems level. From the very start, our whole project has been about creating scalable solutions that don't just make sense to us, but really the whole point of this federal funding was to create solutions that other communities can use and leverage and scale. So starting with number 2, back on that chart, looking at the business food waste. The reason businesses send all their food waste to landfill is because if they wanted to compost, they would have to basically independently negotiate that with a waste hauler and pay for that entirely separately. So working with the Circular Innovation Council, we stood up a pilot working with 53 different businesses across Guelph and Wellington County, where they diverted organics from landfill to compost, just basically mimicking a municipal waste collection system. And not only did they divert that, they also worked to have food rescue built into that from the start. So not only did we divert 303 tons of organic waste, we're looking at 48,000 meals that have been recovered. I think Katie from CIC is around somewhere, who's really the driving force behind this amazing project. Part of that too is thinking about what are social enterprises that can actually capture some of this. So we worked to fund an organization called The Seed, which set up something called Upcycle Kitchen, another project called Community Food, that are actually taking food that would have gone to landfill, rescuing it, preserving it, turning it to useful uses in the community for food insecure populations, for instance. And I want to just think about organizations like this a bit, because a lot of times we think about organizations like this as charities, but really if you're talking about this, or you're talking about Habitat for Humanity Restore, or Goodwill, and all of these different social enterprises in our community that actually divert waste, we need to start thinking of them as part of our waste management solutions a lot more seriously than just sort of charities that do a nice thing and gets, yeah. The other piece is thinking about sort of where we're going upstream. And for this, you know, if you're looking upstream in the food system, so much of the waste you find there is typically clean sources, if it's coming off a factory, for instance, which creates a great opportunity for that to be turned into a new product. So early on, we had that goal of 50, which we blew through, working with 50 businesses, that we blew through in our first year. We went back to FedDev, who gave us some more money, and we launched a program called COIL. And so in the past year and a half with COIL, we've been able to work with about 150 companies across Ontario. Through them, we've helped commercialize over 80 different products, create 131 jobs. And this, of course, was delivered through our collaborators at Innovation Guelph and 10C, who played a key role in this. And not only does this work in the food sector, we've also been working with the cooperators to copy the same approach in the construction sector. So now we have pilots standing up, diverting construction waste from a single dumpster into diverted streams. And we're piloting that at a number of locations across Guelph at the moment. So we're trying to take the learnings from food and scale that into other sectors as well. And briefly on some of our impacts, you know, we worked with, I mentioned 303 businesses, but if we look at GHGs kind of in the bottom there, we can point to 166,000 tons, which is the equivalent of taking 36,000 cars off the road for a year. Just out of a couple years, some projects coming out of Guelph, Wellington. So two little quick thoughts before I pass it on. I think when we think about systems change, we need to think both in terms of, social, economic, and environmental change. All three of these things need to come together when we're working on this, because they all reinforce each other, and we'll lose something if we're missing parts of this. And then the other thing I'd point to from our project that's really been useful is thinking about the network effect. The more people working on this stuff, the more value everybody else gets from working on this stuff. So by having 80 plus projects, we're having a food relief organization that's suddenly able to work with a reusable packaging organization that's suddenly able to jump in and take over that IC&I pilot and actually have that deliver social good. So the more people thinking about circular economy work and tying that together, the more network benefits we're all going to get from it. So thank you.
Thank you, David. So our next speaker is Chantal Rossignol. Chantal is a member of the CERIEC team, and she will talk about the ecosystem of circular economy acceleration lab in Montreal, in CERIEC. Chantal.
Thank you, Daniel. So hi, my name is Chantal. I use the pronoun she. I coordinate CERIEC's network of living labs on the circular economy. As Daniel said, CERIEC was launched at l'École de technologie supérieure, an engineering school in Montreal, in September 2020. And shortly thereafter, in January 2021, my colleague Hortense and I joined CERIEC to work on this network of living labs, as well as its first lab on the construction sector. So it's a fairly new initiative, but we still have a couple of years under our belt to be able to share some insights and some of our learnings. So people often ask, what's one thing that's required for this transition to a circular economy? But in reality, when we're talking about a circular economy, we're talking about all economic activities. So it's not, you know, one technology, it's not one behavior, it's not one organization. So we need to break the silos between, you know, the different sectors, the different value chains, the different links between the value chains, different regions, and different disciplines. And this is part of the mindset behind the network of labs and its systemic approach. So each lab has a lifespan of 3 years. And the aim of the labs is to really accelerate the transition of key sectors of the Quebec economy to a circular economy. It's also to apply learnings from one lab to another, as well as create synergies between the different sectors and the different stakeholders. So as mentioned, the first lab was launched for the construction sector in 2021 with initial financing from Desjardins, and Desjardins also finances the overall framework of this network of labs. And I'm happy to announce for the first time publicly that we've just recently confirmed the financing for our next 2 labs, which will be on agri-food systems as well as textiles. So each lab is really its own entity. Each lab has its own management team, its own financial partners, its own steering committee, its own committee to evaluate research projects, and its own collaborators. And the collaborators in the lab are really a very key component. So to stay in the continuity of this systemic approach, stakeholders of a lab are really stakeholders from across the value chain, so from extraction of resources all the way to the end of life of product, and are also stakeholders that are from public, private, nonprofit, as well as academic organizations. And just to give you an idea, the construction sector, the lab for the construction sector has mobilized over 200 stakeholders of over 100 organizations. So just keep the variety of these stakeholders in mind as I move over to the next slide. So these are living labs. Living labs mean many things to many people. For these labs, there are 2 fundamental principles: co-creation and applied research. So as I said, the living labs have a lifespan of 3 years. The first year, so year 1, is mainly the co-creation phase, and years 2 and 3 are really to carry out these projects that come out of the co-creation phase. So during year 1, the varied stakeholders from the previous slide are mobilized over a series of 4 workshops, 4 co-creation workshops. The first one is we bring all the stakeholders together to say, okay, what's the vision of a circular sector in 20 to 30 years? So at this point, we're starting to have this really common language culture of what is a circular economy, a common language. Then we bring back the stakeholders together to say, well, what are the barriers to that vision? And then we bring the stakeholders back together and we say, well, what are the solutions that we need to put in place to lift those barriers? And here we're talking about solutions that could be, once again, they could be technology, legislative, or they can also be behavioral. Then we say, okay, well, what projects do we want to put in place to test these solutions in a concrete, real-life setting? And we're talking about research projects, so we're obviously documenting our methods as well as our results to be able to share them and share that new knowledge, transfer that knowledge across the sector in Quebec, but also beyond. And the reason why the stakeholders are represented here by dots that are of increasing in size and increasing in color intensity and are also kind of shown in an upward slant. It's just to show that with this iterative process, over time, each stakeholder gets a better understanding of what is the circular economy, what are circular economy strategies, and what is the context and what are their practices within their own value chain. So also increases the collective intelligence of the lab over time. And to say this in a really simple way is I think we're having conversations with stakeholders in the construction lab that we could not have had a year ago or 2 years ago. So a couple of success factors. One, being associated with credible partners and experts. Having money for projects, people want to go beyond discussions and recommendations. Having a co-creation approach that is structured and rigorous. And letting stakeholders know that their engagement in the lab is really to the extent of their capacity, and that when we ask them to first engage in the lab, it's really to understand what is their context and what is their reality and what is their knowledge. Also having facilitators that create a sense of neutrality as well as a safe space for open dialogue. And one challenge is that this, co-creation isn't always in line with funding programs as they are today. As I said, we are really happy to announce that we've, recently confirmed the financing for our next 2 labs. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. So the fourth speaker is Shigufa Chitranjiwala Merchant.
Yes. That's a mouthful.
She's an assistant professor at the School of Science in the Environment at the Memorial University of Newfoundland, and she will speak about how to identify barriers in design for recovery, reuse, and regeneration in consumer durables and emergent renewable energy products.
Thank you, Danielle. So my question to you, and I guess this is the interactive part, when you think of waste, what is the first place that comes to your mind? You can just raise your hand and share. First place that comes to mind when you think of waste?
Landfill.
Landfill? Everybody agrees? I see a lot of nods. How many of you think of your own backyard? I hope nobody, right? And that is what I'm going to talk to you about. So this project that we are working on is a multi-university project funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Funding Agency. We were amongst the 3 in Canada who were awarded this fund. The multi-university is McMaster University, that'll be looking at the design stage. Memorial University, where we are looking at the metrics, circularity, life cycle, bringing in. But we are 2 people working from Memorial, from the St. John's campus. We are working with communities, both rural and remote. One of them will be an Indigenous community, and the other will be a remote non-Indigenous community. And the 3rd university is bringing all the business, design, community, and the policy pieces together. From Trent University, we will be bringing the policy piece together. And of course, this would not be possible if we do not actually go out and ask the communities what they want, which is why we've paired up and partnered with the I'm going to say this badly, so all those who are Indigenous here, please excuse my poor pronunciation on this. Meopakek First Nation, but also called the Con River community. And then we are partnering with the town of Harbor, Maine, which is the non-Indigenous community. So what are we trying to do here? I asked you if you think of your backyard. So we think of the landfill, but if you look at vulnerable populations globally, and Africa is one case, whether they're consumer durable goods, electronics, these are lying in their communities. They do not have a fantastic waste management system like Toronto or Montreal or the bigger provinces of our nations are Mumbai or Tehran. So internationally, we are used to not seeing our waste because we think we are great at recycling our waste and we put it in the blue bin and then we don't care where it goes. This is how it is for many people in the world. But this is globally. How does it affect us, right? This is in our own communities. These are pictures taken in Labrador, actually where their waste is in their backyard, literally. And this is a reality in Canada. So what we are seeing and we are used to seeing is design for obsolescence. The latest gadget that comes in makes the other very, very functional piece obsolete because now we are in an Apple store or in some Samsung store looking for the latest design with a material that was very, very functional, but we just discarded it. It's going to go into e-waste and recycled in our own hope that we are somehow going to donate it out. In Africa, none of the cars that they use are new. It is all old cars. They only have a recycle system of cars that get passed on from the Western world. So waste is invisible in our communities, in urban communities, but definitely not in rural and remote communities, where waste management systems are very differently defined. And I think that is something that I would like all of us here to think about when we think of waste in the bigger, broader systems sense, that systems doesn't apply only to smaller provinces where we know what we're going to do with the waste because there are tons of it. What happens when it is in these communities? And that it is inequitable. It is very inequitable for these communities, vulnerable populations across the world, in our own communities as well. And bringing that equation into this conversation requires community participation. So it is not us telling them what they should do, it's us asking them what they want. And this perspective, I think, is something that First Nations, indigenous populations are very, very, very particular about, and rightfully so. So this is what we are trying to do, is looking at one sector, which they are, it's inevitable that we're going to start speaking about renewable energy products, because that's where we are headed by 2050. This is not a question of if, it's a question of when we move to solar panels and wind blades and battery-operated stuff. So what are the consumer durable goods that we use today for the same purposes, same functions, and what will the other renewable energy products do in the functions that we're expected to use? And what does it mean for a place like Newfoundland and Labrador, and for indigenous communities or rural northern communities? So these are the questions we're trying to ask with this project. So what are consumer durable goods? What are the learnings that we have failed from here, so we don't translate them into the renewable energy emergent technologies that are coming in? And so what can we do in terms of having a systems-based design that considers not only reuse, regeneration, recycle, and all of that, and not only carbon emissions or carbon dioxide emissions that are global warming, but from a life cycle perspective, things that also mean groundwater leaching, toxicity. What are the other life cycle impacts that we seem to neglect when we think of only CO2 emissions? We are in an emergency, not even an emergency, we are living the climate change crisis now. We don't have the time to think about what will happen to other things, because we need to be under the 1.5 degrees. So our focus is very, very narrow towards CO2, but we are not bringing in the other life cycle impacts that inform the CO2. So what is the proactive thinking that we need to do? That is what we're trying to bring into this, with the examples of consumer durable goods, which are pervasive, and then talk about what it would mean for electronic waste, battery waste, or other emergent renewable energy products. So here's a little breakdown of what consumer durable goods look like. So this is data from 2018 that we've said. You can see for all durable goods management, we have only around 11% that really gets recycled, and around 9 to 10% that actually gets incinerated for energy. The rest is all landfill. So we are really looking at a massive failure on our part to make products that have anything that is recyclable, or something that doesn't go to the landfill. So our worst case scenario is this, and we don't want that to be replicated. So what are we going to do to change that? And then this is the miscellaneous durables waste management, which you can see miscellaneous durables is electronics, televisions, computers, sporting goods. Now, this is great for us, but what happens when you think about rural and northern communities? We might say solar panels are great for you, but they might come around, we don't need solar panels, we need heaters actually. We live in very, very northern cold temperatures. Why are you selling us solar panels? So who's asking them, what should we do in 2050 when we will move to the renewable energy products design, and we will say, here's a great solar panel, it works, this is the function, this is the price, and they go like, yeah, and now what do I do with this? Because I really need a heater. So going to them and seeing what durable goods that they really need is the first question we should be asking that. And as you can see over here, and I will just speak about this, if you think of the durables waste, we're looking at just 1.5% that is recycled and 3% that is actually incinerated, and the rest is all in landfills even today. Now, renewable energy products then is what we're looking at. And if you think about solar panels, and these have metals, and a lot of you here are very familiar with these things, lead and cadmium, and they will eventually have, from the life cycle perspective, leaching impacts. Yes, you might recycle them, but what happens to the others that do not get recycled, sit in the backyard, then that is a toxic impact that we have to consider. Recycling of just 9% is not the goal. So if you're looking at this is 2016 that we were looking at 250,000 that would be in use. And by 2019, we're looking at around 4 million that are installed. And that is going to be another 30 years. And even what was installed in 2009, we're looking at waste that is going to be a massive amount of solar panel waste that we have no plan for, even today. And then if you're looking at wind blade waste, even today, and wind blades get obsolete in 20 years with the current technologies. But the installations that we're doing are going to surpass that. And then we have actually currently no economically viable or scalable technologies that can break this epoxy resin down. And the rest is actually being dumped in a landfill or buried in the ground. That has its own impacts and changing the balance of our planet and our Earth. So I think we really need to think about more than just global warming. When we think about these transition to this, which one needs to be economically viable, second needs to be a just transition, particularly one size does not fit all transition. So what are we trying to do about this and why are we passionate about this? First, clearly we need to do something right at the start of the chain, not at end of life. End of life is a retroactive prospect. We need to start thinking from the design perspective. Modular designs with paywall patenting, yes, it's great, but it has to be across the system where then there is inbuilt from design to use to other things and then end of life and bringing it back into a circular system. So that is innovation opportunity across the entire life cycle rather than end of life carbon emissions only. We are looking at unintended consequences which we may not be considering when we think of renewable energy products. And that is something we really need to start thinking about and avoid right at this stage where we are emerging into the technologies rather than let's fix this and do a Band-Aid solution afterwards, which is how we've been functioning while we are in this emergent climate energy crisis. And, leveraging knowledge. Now, this is a very, very important part that what are the mistakes we have made and how can we not repeat them? And transferring that learning into these products is what we really need to do. And knowing that waste management is inequitable, we need to bring in traditional ecological knowledge. We are not doing this for the first time. Our ancestors have done this and done it very well. We've created systems that have now gone global with transport across the world. This is going to stay. Nothing's going to change. So we need to innovate even in that systemic thinking about processes, not just products. And technology is going to innovate more so that we are going to make this more equitable rather than saying just become only local, because we're not going to remain local when we have batteries that are sourced, critical metals are sourced from somewhere else, also political. So it's not just local, it is political and it is inequitable, and we need to think about those things right now when we develop the framework. And then, of course, we have a framework for the Sustainable Development Goals. And yes, there's innovation. Yes, there's sustainable cities and communities. But this has to be done in such a way that there are reduced inequalities, there is gender parity, and of course that this all impacts Sustainable Development Goal 12. It's not only, and I was speaking to somebody today, it's not, I forget, I think it was Rosemary Cooper, that it is not about just consumption, it's also about production. So the cycle on consumption and production and producer responsibility, all of this is not just the consumer's responsibility. So bringing it all together in a very, very integrated, collaborative, knowledge-based framework where communities are informed, not one-way street, but asked and included, and that is what we really need to do. So what are we trying to do here? We're going to reach out to make an integrated, inclusive, circular framework for renewable energy product design. I'm sorry about that. So what we are, and we have started this work, is we're going to approach our communities, we have partnered with them, to really speak to them, what do you want? How do you see it? What is your traditional ecological knowledge that we can learn from? What's the two-eyed way of seeing? How can we improve this? What is it that you really wish to see? And how can you inform us as researchers, as industry people, as academia, as industry, as policymakers, because we are involved in that. And one of those things will be done in a co-developed manner, in a collaborative and consultative manner. And then from that, we're going to then go speak to our design professionals that what can we change right at the design stage? How can we not make the mistakes that we have made for consumer durable goods and change that in a very, very proactive manner so that we can inform design and therefore inform business models. And from business models, policy, and regulatory frameworks, because they all go hand in hand. And this has to be done with including traditional ecological knowledge. All communities come with their own background of knowledge of dealing with the land, working with the land, integrating with the land. They have done this for years, and kind of just giving them theoretical frameworks is probably, it's a very immature way, I guess, so for the lack of a better word, but bringing their knowledge up front and center is what we needed to do, and then apply theory, grounded theory, life cycle assessment, life cycle analysis, and then the developed circularity metrics for materials design, for processes, and this integration of the three is, I think, what is going to inform policy and make the change. So rather than the top-down approach, we probably need to start going bottom-up to make that change. Sorry, this was quite doomy and gloomy, not so funny as the others, but this is really, I think, the change in perspective that we need to make as a cohesive group here so that we can see this towards a just transition and equitable transition. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Shagitha. So our last speaker is Christa Clay. Christa is Manager, Economic Transformation, Circular Economy at the Vancouver Economic Commission, and she will talk about how to scale circular innovation in Vancouver. Christa.
Thank you. Might just hold this a little lower. Is that good for everybody? Great. I'm really happy to be here and also to kind of round up this panel with another economic development perspective, though there could be no shortage of circular puns, I guess, at a Circular Economy Summit. So my name is Christa Clay. I work at the Vancouver Economic Commission. I'm going to speak a little bit more in depth about who we are and what we're about, just for those of you who aren't aware. So first I'd like to speak to where we work. So the Vancouver Economic Commission is located on the stolen and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And that's really important and vital to what we do at the Commission and also to the circular economy work specifically. I know that's been brought up throughout this panel and throughout this summit and will continue to be so because I think we all acknowledge how necessary that is a component of what we do moving forward. And I truly believe that the work we do at the VEC and the work that we do in circularity must incorporate indigeneity, and as we indigenize our economy, it will inherently become more circular. So the Vancouver Economic Commission is the economic development agency for the city of Vancouver. We're not-for-profit or fully funded by the city. We like to say arm's length, but I see Aaron and Meg sitting next to each other, and they're not quite that far apart. So we work really closely. We're really proud to have that partnership, and without that, we couldn't do the work that we do, and it wouldn't look the same. And you'll see that in a couple of the projects as well. The core work that we do is very local, local forward, local first. It's one of our core pledges. Climate action being another, economic reconciliation, and prosperity for all. And the intention behind this work is to build a resilient economy for Vancouver that is competitively positioned in the global market. But like I said, that is done in alliance with our city staff and with our municipal, provincial, and federal collaborators and partners. The ways in which the circular economy team at the Vancouver Economic Commission focuses our work involves four key functions, I would say. So we convene with purpose, we facilitate innovation and important conversations across industry, we advocate to all levels of government, and we provide leading edge research to try to anticipate what the economy might do moving forward and what we need to consider in order to build a resilient and future-proof economy. A couple of the key focus areas within those that I'm going to speak to today is under the facilitation work that we do is business-to-business innovation, and then advocacy within the city, and I'll speak to a bit more about industrial land when we get to it. But just to narrow it down a little bit more, two specific projects that I want to bring up that I think are pretty pertinent to this conversation before we talk about collaboration across the province and across the nation. So the Circular Food Innovation Lab, or CFIL as we like to call it, for those of us who love acronyms, is a research and design lab that was about an 8-month-long project, partnership with the City of Vancouver Solutions Lab. Erin Nichols is sitting right here. She was a key participant, as is Meg O'Shea sitting next to her. So she'll talk your ear off about it if you let her and if you'd like to, as will I. partnership with the City of Vancouver Solutions Lab, Vancouver Economic Commission's Economic Transformation Lab, and Emily Carr University of Art and Design, which was a key part of how the lab came to be and what it ended up looking like. So it was about 8 months long. It actually just wrapped in February of this year, and we have a final report that's out on the city website if you'd like to flip through it to tell a little bit about the story of what happened in the lab and what's happening next. This I would consider to be maybe one definition of a living lab, though I agree there are many different versions. The focus of the lab was to bring folks from across the food system in Vancouver. So we strived to get as much representation across the food system as possible. This was an open call across the city for those that are operating within city limits to participate in a project that would mitigate food waste in operations and prototype circular solutions across the supply chain and across the food system. So it was a bit of a big task. We ended up with, I think, over 20 folks that were going to participate initially, and then it kind of pared down a little bit because it was quite involved and co-creative. So the report outlines a lot of the details of the initiatives that happened in the lab and the prototypes that came about. It started off with a lot of brainstorming and site visits to try to understand what the barriers and opportunities were to advance circularity within the food system in Vancouver, which looked different if we were talking to manufacturers, if we were talking to distributors, to some restaurants and food rescue organizations. We worked with them really closely to prototype about 7 or 8 solutions that we thought had a really good opportunity to initiate systemic change within the food system. A lot of those resulted in some tools or some prototypes that are replicable in operations across the food system. So I'd encourage you to check those out and see how you see those looking in your community, if they might have a good impact. And then onwards from that, knowing that the lab was short-term, as it was funded by the Carbon Cities Neutral Alliance and MyTax, we wanted this work to continue and are continuing to build the relationships in the network that started in the lab so that we might ensure the work that was done can continue to grow and the community that was built can continue to grow as well. The second thing I'm going to speak of is called the Green Industrial Innovation District, or GRID, which is trademarked, so I feel like it's an acronym I'll stand behind for sure. So this was started by Louise Schwartz, who those of you who are not from Vancouver, I see a couple of nods. She's a bit of a firecracker, I like to call her, but a driving force for change in waste management and sustainability in Vancouver. She co-founded the Recycling Alternative, which at its most simplest of terms is a waste management company, but does so much more than that in building community and advocacy around change and circularity in Vancouver. Louise unfortunately couldn't be with us. She's taking some well-deserved time. But I'm going to speak a little bit about GRID and what it's meant to be and how it might impact and spread across the nation and the world. So the process of GRID and the idea around GRID is to create green industrial innovation districts that are also creating equitable and accessible means of employment located nearby to the cities in which the waste is being transferred from. So the kind of case study of GRID in Vancouver is located and centered within the False Creek Flats industrial zone. I mentioned industrial land under advocacy because we have an industrial lands crisis in Vancouver, not unlike a lot of other cities. And we acknowledge that in order to process our waste in a circular fashion, we need industrial land in order to be remanufacturing and processing those materials nearby to where they're being used. So the False Creek Flats and where Recycling Alternative is located is 1.7 kilometers from the downtown core of Vancouver. It's very prized land. It's very threatened. We have less than 10% of the industrial land that we originally had in Vancouver, and we have less than 1% of vacancy in our industrial spaces. So it's really poignant, it's really important, and there isn't really a way forward unless we can solve this crisis and learn how we better adapt the needs of our real estate situation in Vancouver and the needs of our circular economy ecosystem in order to build resiliency in Vancouver. So the GRID does a lot of things. There's multiple papers that have been written about it, and I encourage you to look through them. But it does build local resiliency and infrastructure, supply chain and production, and jobs and economy. And something that that is really underpinned in the reports that Louise has been a part of is the equity and inclusion that is so deeply a part of the GRID and creating good, clean, green jobs that are located near to city transport, near to where people are living, also creating space for the arts and for all the industries that are represented within the city. There's about 3 members of the Grid Steering Committee that are here at today's conference in various places. It's really big and growing, and looking forward to see what it looks like in Vancouver and how it might look in other communities. I had a little bit of short and sweet presentation, but I'm really happy to be in such good company and to have representation across the province from coast to coast, and excited to hear how we can learn from each other and grow this work. Thanks.
Thank you, Christa. So we're going to start this Q&A session. So first question, what was your process to develop and implement your initiative? Does it start with a vision? Does it start with a mapping of stakeholders? Who got the first sparks to start your initiatives?
We started with a foreign direct investment strategy plan to see from an economic development perspective. That's how we did that, to see what makes us special, what makes us stand out, what do we have, what's unique to the area, and that's how we figured that out.
Okay. And what was the next step? So mapping, all the
Yeah, so we started mapping that, and then we started a marketing strategy in 2017 with funding from the province called MetalTech Alley, and it's been very successful, and we're building on that. So first we just marketed MetalTech Alley, then we started with circular economy initiatives, and from the circular economy initiatives, the battery hub was born.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. David?
So Guelph had been doing things on the circular economy for quite a while, but I think the impetus for this particular project was the Federal Smart Cities Challenge.
Okay.
And that was a fantastic Infrastructure Canada program, and it really kind of guided how this was developed, because it said it was looking for a huge range of community stakeholders, from not-for-profits and business and academics and all the rest. So it was really a couple-year process of trying to say, hey, as a community, we want to apply for this thing. What should we apply for? And food, I think, rose to the top easy because of Guelph, and there's a lot of that stuff there. And then it was, I think, kind of through the community, the concept of circular economy came out, and these whole of community goals came out, and so it was really co-created from the very start.
Okay. Yeah. And what about the construction sector? I mean, was it decided altogether that this sector will be prioritized, or?
No, that was actually, it's kind of the opposite, that we were talking to the cooperators after we had done a lot of work in the food system.
Yep.
We were well on our way with 60-something projects, and they said, hey, could you do the same thing for construction?
Okay.
Because they're having significant challenges there, and so it was kind of looking at our model, evaluating how it came together and what was successful, and then just sort of plopping it over. So we did the same sort of research studies, we launched the same sort of innovation, and just kind of trying to build a machine that can be replicable, not only in other places in the country, but in other sectors.
Okay. Chantal?
Is it on? Yeah.
I know the answer, but...
Yeah, Danielle knows the answer. So, I mean, the sectors come, so the first lab that was launched, it was for the construction sector. It came because we had financing from Desjardins, and that was identified as a sector of interest. It's a great coincidence that it's also a sector that uses a lot of resources, and it's a really, important economic vector with lots of employment, et cetera. And then the other sectors, we worked really hard for one sector, which was, single-use plastics in the health sector. We put that aside because we had a lot of interest. We mobilized a lot of stakeholders, but weren't able to, kind of concretiser, get the financing. Yeah. And so we put it aside. I mean, it's not dead, it's still there. I hope to reactivate it soon. But we put it aside to be able to look at other labs. And then, textiles kind of came from a great opportunity. We hadn't put much effort into it. And then the other one was really agro-foods, where we, that was another sector that we had identified, and, really mobilized a lot of actors, spoke to a lot of people, and then the financing came through. And, I have to say that at the network level of these labs, we have a steering committee, and we had identified at the onset, priority sectors, which were agri-food, textiles, and plastics. Construction had already been launched, so it didn't appear. So, it's kind of all of this together. But the reality is that these labs need financing. So, we go with the opportunities, and, I don't know if it's good or not, but I mean, right now, all sectors, need a hand in their acceleration to a circular economy. So basically, likely if you take a sector, it could use a bit of help. And I think another one that we're really looking at and really putting a lot of effort is critical minerals and metals.
I guess you can keep your microphone open.
So how many of you have heard of the Shark Tank? So we went through an academic version of it with the Canadian government. The federal government was looking at circular economy as a huge thrust and had the funding idea with the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, which is the CERIEC funding. And instead of us writing a proposal, all of us who are interested in circular economy, they put out a call for researchers across Canada to apply for the Ideas Lab, where Canada has 16, just like you have 17 SDGs, there's 16 areas for the Canadian thrust areas. Circular economy is one of them, or responsible consumption, or Earth's carrying capacity, as it is called. So they had that call, and we applied to be part of the Ideas workshop in October 2021, if I'm not mistaken, yes. And it was 2 days of full-day workshops, and it's there that we actually went through training and ideas and really getting familiar with who are the researchers from Vancouver across to Newfoundland and all across Canada who are interested in working in this area. So CERIEC did a wonderful job of getting all of us together and having this workshop. So that's where we really met, and it's from this workshop that little groups were formed in broad ideas, from brainstorming, from really building this whole idea of how do we see Canada as a circular economy leader. And so our group was formed in that. And then we had to actually, in the second round, pitch an idea to the, so I remember from the Smart Prosperity Institute, we had a person who was our mentor, but we were pitching our ideas to them. So out of them, they said only 3 ideas would be selected, and then these people would be able to put their proposal forward for funding. And so we went through this entire year-long, or at least 8-month-long process, and then wrote the proposal and actually were awarded the grant with this idea. So it was a whole process. In true academic sense, it was a long, drawn process, but very intense, very fruitful. And I think I had the privilege and honor of meeting a lot of people from across Canada who are involved in this work, but they were mostly academics. And so today, what I'm getting a chance is to meet all of you from industry and elsewhere, which is, I think we are the minority here, the academics. So that was I think, another goal that bringing that together would be very important, and bringing this whole nexus of Canadians working for a common goal for Canadian economy, circular economy, was really, I think, this whole purpose of why we wanted to do this.
Thank you. Christa?
For the Circular Food Innovation Lab, it was a bit of a product of some frustrated champions, I like to say, from the city and from Emily Carr University. And it was enabled by the Carbon City Neutral Alliance grant and my tax funding, so Emily Carr students could participate. So that was kind of came out of some circular economy food research that the Vancouver Economic Commission and the City of Vancouver had partnered with Deloitte to bring about, which recommended how big of a part industry needs to play in a transition for a circular economy of food. And to speak to that as well, in the City of Vancouver specifically, we have a really strong industry network of circular economy activity. So we don't have a strong circular economy framework or roadmap in the City of Vancouver. It's kind of peppered throughout a lot of our city plans and policies, and you could make a strong argument for it for sure, but what really leads the way is industry. And so I think GRID is a really good example of what that looks like when industry steps up and speaks to what's needed in the ecosystem, advocates for it, and then what we try to do in the best way that we can is advocate where they don't have capacity to. They're all busy running their businesses. We heard this as well from the businesses that participated in the Circular Food Innovation Lab. So what is the role of municipalities and economic development agencies and cities in supporting industry, even when it's leading edge and it's bringing things forward? There is some capacity where we have it, those of us who do have internal capacity, to be supporting businesses in the ways that they need in order for all of this to scale and grow.
Okay. Is it necessary to have a municipal or provincial roadmaps to facilitate the initiatives, or at least to keep them on a long way after they started? I mean, is it necessary, or it's just a useful, for instance?
I mean, we don't have one, and we're doing a lot. So I don't think it's necessary. I think there's a lot to be gained from having a roadmap. I think we would love to have a material flows analysis and a bit more maybe consensus, especially across Metro Vancouver. I think one thing we struggle with, being a municipality within a region that is of 23 municipalities, our waste streams flow all around the place. And so we need regional leadership to also acknowledge what the best way forward is. So that's something we're constantly kind of trying to figure out what the best, I guess, tiers of direction are, federally, provincially, regionally, and then municipally. I think, like I said before, I think there's so much that can be done otherwise, but if there was a strong direction that was agreed upon Metro Vancouver, that would make a really large impact on what we were able to do.
But would it be more, I would say, efficient to have common goals in terms of circular economy?
Absolutely. I think so. I mean,
through a roadmap, or something more official than just several initiatives all together without any common ground, I would say.
Yeah, I think a roadmap has a lot of positive function. I think it would be a really great tool. I also know how much good work is happening already everywhere, and if we could, I mean, me and David talk a lot about what it looks like to have a COIL in Vancouver. So like if we can just try to not copy paste, but take models that are successful in other regions and implement them where we are, then it's not the same as having a roadmap that's place-based to Vancouver, but it's taking out a lot of the time it would take to build a roadmap if you're able just to implement action that's already been successful.
Mm-hmm. Other point of view?
We are 7 smaller communities that are actually working together. We are funded by our municipalities, so they follow our lead as the economic development driver for the region on circular economy. We do have buy-in for our projects from the province. They've been funding us since 2017, and the projects that we're working on now, we feel is going to benefit the whole Lower Columbia, the West Kootenay, the East Kootenay, BC, and at the end of the day, Canada. So our objective now is to get some federal support for the work that we're doing.
Okay, thank you. David?
I'd say that just in terms of the roadmap, there's so much experimentation and innovation that's needed before we can actually get to real circular systems. We need a lot of people trying a lot of things and a lot of things that aren't going to work. And so, I think roadmaps are useful, and we've certainly had targets of where we want to go generally. We've had data, which I'll say data is more of a compass than a map. You still need creativity, you still need experimentation to try and carve out some space to figure things out, and maybe some of it works. But down the road, we can get there. But I think there's a lot of conversation often about roadmaps, like we're going to get this data and it'll be the solution, it'll be all done. But I think there's so much messy work that has to still happen to get those insights to really make a roadmap robust and actionable moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say really quickly, I think, roadmaps could be useful, that it depends, what is that roadmap, based on? What data is it based on? How is it integrated with, other roadmaps, et cetera? And I think one thing that's really important is if you're going to have a roadmap, it's really to make sure that it's integrated into all, departments, services, et cetera. And it's not something that's on the side, but it's really, integrated on a transversal level where, all economic development or all, projects or funding, et cetera, integrates, these elements of the roadmap. It's not just the roadmap, for the circular economy people, but it's a circular economy roadmap for, whatever region, and then to scale it, whether you're going from a city to a province and then to the country and then, globally eventually one day.
What have been the key challenges or barriers of your initiative? We heard about financing from Chantal, but is there other barriers, main barriers?
I can attest to that. The projects that we work on is so unique that it doesn't fit on in the boxes that the province and the federal government has for funding streams at this moment. So that's a challenging situation for us because we either have to change our project or we have to convince them to change their box, which is not very easy to do.
Other barriers?
I think one of the things we've found, I mean, it's not a challenge, but I think a consideration definitely in terms of the time that it needs to be allotted to any initiative is an ethics application, because it takes a lot of time and effort and energy that goes into interacting with the right people to get an application that is ethically completely approved, sound, before the actual work begins. So any initiative that, and most of the funding is usually a year or 2 years, but one of the things that needs to be done is have established relationships right at the head. Because if those relationships are not established, they take time to establish, which means your funding would be over before they are even established. And so funding in itself is a constraint to get it, but also to get the objectives fulfilled within that time slot. So have those relationships with community built in advance. That is one of the challenges that if they're not addressed right ahead, it can be a bottleneck. Ethics applications take time, and so having those things accounted for in your project or any initiative, I think involvement from different stakeholders takes that kind of effort and time. And so that should be considered while the project is underway.
I would also add to that, in a lot of this work, especially with the Circular Food Innovation Lab, it was really hard to try to tell the impact of the story in ways that are able to kind of fill in a form. So the ways in which we communicate impact in storytelling into the work that we do doesn't really align with a lot of funding requirements and how you talk about what this work is meant to be. Relationships is a really big part of it. Networks is a lot of it, and a lot of it is really invisible. It's kind of hard to know in the moment what's going to happen, other than when you're there and you know that things are happening and there's a lot of energy for change. And so, especially when you're working in a more municipal space or like in a bit of a political space, trying to talk about things in terms of when do you try to tell the story of what happened? How do you say that you need more time, because relationships are built on trust and trust takes time, and how do you communicate that in an effective way and have someone still think that what you did was a good use of their money is something that's a big struggle.
And what about awareness or knowledge of the circular economy? How do you engage or mobilize your stakeholders if they don't know about the circular economy? I mean, I guess it's still a big issue in Canada. How do you deal with that?
I'd say something really quick. I mean, when we mobilize stakeholders to participate in the lab, I mean, definitely we have circular economy experts, but we also invite people from their expertise, from their context, from their sector. And what we say sometimes is that we have these people captive, for 1 year of co-creation. I mean, we're contaminating them with circular economy. We're influencing them. They're learning what it is, and it's done over a period of time. So they'll hear it, and then it's not just about hearing it from the outside, but they're actually they're living the lab. They're called a living lab. They're living what it is to try to apply these solutions, and that's really different from just oh, this is what it is theoretically. When you try to bring that into your decisions, into developing your project, you get a different comprehension. And we have examples of, let's say, researchers that we invited into the lab, not because they were circular economy experts, but because they were experts within the construction field. And today, they're integrating circular economy into their future projects. And I think that's part of what these labs do and what we're trying to do.
I'd say that communications is definitely a challenge, and awareness is a big piece too. Mm-hmm. I think we've been fortunate that we've had a bunch of money to put out there, and people will learn about something if they can get funding to do a thing. But even still, it's hard. So we need to educate consumers on what circular economy is, and so we've worked to bring the upcycled certified standard to Canada for food, for instance, and supported businesses to get that. So we need consumers to be aware. Then we need businesses to be aware, and we have our programs for that. We're actually launching a Circular Economy 101 course that'll be very low cost through University of Guelph next year as part of that. And then the other piece is you need the policy side to give a nudge too. And going back to your earlier question about challenges, and there's still a bit of a hard time there because we know consumers are interested, for instance, in upcycled products. We can make the case for businesses on where it makes sense, but there's some of our projects, when you move from a subsidized to a fully funded model, it becomes a lot more difficult without, say, an organics ban, right? To really make people force separate what they're doing. So the awareness, I think, is growing, and the metrics make sense, especially in a business context. But when policy can come in and really push it a bit more, that'll be very useful.
Okay, so the government has a role to play, so a big
Absolutely.
role to play.
Yeah, and as municipalities, I think, certainly an Ontario municipality, we're very limited in how much we can influence our local market compared to the province or the feds.
And also to adapt their program to the circular economy, as Chantal said previously.
Yeah.
And what other role the government can play in your initiative? Is there any other role that it can play? I mean, to support, apart, the policy making, apart, the subsidies, apart. Is there other role that they can play as well?
Is that me?
Everybody.
I just wanted to answer the question you asked previously, and it could tie into one you just asked, is I think there are a lot of people who are doing circular work in small ways. It's unfortunately, they just don't call it circular economy. And this is, I think, one thing that needs to change is the awareness that what you're doing is now called circular economy. It's an initiative that can be funded and that will have policy or government or municipal government or some kind of, incentive for you. And I think that is first the thing that needs to go out. I mean, there are so many people in communities who are doing this. It's natural for them, intuitive for them. It's the good way. It's the best practice that they've been following. So it's just that we have given it a terminology. And I don't mean this only in Canada or in the Western world. I mean this is happening in the Asian world, in other parts of the world in a much bigger way. They don't use the same terms we do. And so creating that awareness that this is the work that we are calling circular economy, focusing on what the action is rather than the terminology, I think will change the game in a lot of its awareness and its uptake, its buy-in, its funding, what the governments can do to help and support. And I think that is what needs to go out more broadly.
I can add to that. We were looking at a circular economy course at the Selkirk Technology Access Centre, and it's based on the model that Rosemary Cooper is doing at BCIT, but we're going to make it industry focused in our region because we are doing industrial circular economy, where we take that learnings from the businesses there already, the industry there, bring it to the students and get them to learn about circular economy and then take it further from there.
Okay, thank you.
I would say certainly at the local level, government has a huge role to play as a convener.
Yeah.
In most municipalities, the only people who talk about circular economy are in the waste department, and they're off in the waste department managing their own solid waste stuff, and that's important work. I think what we're doing that's a little different is that we have our own office that's basically external facing, working with NGOs and private businesses and innovators and all these different people who are all doing circular economy, and we're all tying that together and helping them work together and finding ways to turn 1 + 1 into 11, just like what you're saying. So I think in a lot of communities, there's a lot of people doing things on circular economy, but it's not knitted together because municipal governments aren't investing in someone to knit this together a little bit more. So I think that's one piece. The other piece, I think, as kind of Living Labs, is having policymakers more at the table with us. We reach out to government and tell them what we're doing a lot. But for instance, right now we're doing a pilot on source separation at construction sites at new builds in Guelph. Typically, everything goes into one dumpster, everything goes to landfill. For every 5 houses you build, enough wood is wasted to build a 6th house. So now we have a pilot that's at 3 housing build sites where we're separating the wood into different columns. And so we spoke to the Ministry of Environment in Ontario last week saying, we'd love you to come in with us and get the data from this and see how this could scale and inform a different, business model and a policy model across the province. And hopefully they'll come in. But I mean, a lot of the times working with other levels of government on some of the stuff we're doing is that, they'll read the report when we're done, but they don't necessarily have the resources to be at the table, be in the experiments. There's the implication of giving funding, which they're not necessarily comfortable with. And so figuring out how can you knit that together so the living lab things we're all doing can scale up more broadly.
Any questions from the floor?
I'd like to say just two things. I'd like to take this opportunity, first of all, to do a shout out to the City of Montreal. I mean, with the City of Montreal, the circular economy is really being pushed by the Department of Economic Development, and I think that's really great, and that's what we really want to see, and that's what we need to see. We really need to see circular economy as something from the economy, and it's all economic activities. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, when we have the living labs, we have public partners that are participating in the labs, and these labs are a two-way give-give. I mean, definitely we want to understand what their context is, but there's also an intelligence. There's a culture. There's a common language that's coming out, and it's also there. So the people who are participating in the lab can take that information and they can use that to build their future strategies and their future vision within their own organization. That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a question. Yeah, over there. Just wait for the microphone.
I'm just going to add on to what David said and ask a bit of a question, is how can we, corporately and corporations, help you advocate to the government to get them to hear our voice about stuff like this?
Good question.
Good question. I think municipal governments talk to other orders of government about a lot of things and have very complex relationships, right? So municipalities can't really advocate in the sense that a business sector could advocate. So I think the more that there are, the players who want to see this change, to come together, show that they're willing to put resources into this, and have those conversations with other partners, that's what will actually turn the needle and make governments pay more attention. Because, a municipality saying this is of interest, often that sounds like we just want money to do a thing, right? But if corporations say this is of interest, they think that will lead to jobs and growth, and people in government understand that they don't understand business and will listen. So I think, associations, partnerships, things like that, I think are very powerful.
Other questions from the floor?
Go ahead. There's a few on the WOVA app, but I'll throw them after. Sure, I think this is more for Christa and David. You both talked about food circularity, and I'm just sitting here as a parent and as a citizen and wondering, what is one very impactful thing I could do as a consumer to support circularity when it comes to food?
Yeah, I think asking questions and knowing about it is already more than a lot of people do. I think I see it a lot as just a personal journey, and all of us having our own values and understanding where food comes from, how we treat it, and how we value it, which is something that was a really big priority within the lab. The lab itself wasn't targeted towards the consumer market specifically, it was more towards industry. But previous to that, the City of Vancouver did a grocery retail solutions project. Sorry if I bubbled on that, Aaron. And that was also kind of connected to what the relationships are between consumers and the market. And there's a lot of resources out there on tips and tools for that. I think being a part of the conversation and working within your own local food system and talking about what's happening, I think something that a lot of people are a little bit invisible, or it's not super visible to what's happening in the system. A lot of it kind of happens in the background. So I think anything you can be doing to increase your visibility about where food is going and coming from, and educating yourself and talking to people about it, is just where I would start, I guess, from a consumer perspective.
One thing, a lot of our work has found that meal planning is very, very important, so you know what you're cooking, and that is an easy way of avoiding food waste. And then, thinking about what you're consuming and purchasing, of course, trying to buy local. But I also, there's a lot of focus on consumers. We should also not forget that so much more food waste is upstream in the system, right? And so, yes, we all have to think individually, but I think we also have to collectively all think that we need to solve that upstream problem too, because that's where I think the bigger bang for the buck is as a society.
I will say, I think about kind of all circularity, and this is the same between consumer level and industry level and policy level, it's just distributed accountability and everybody thinking about what can I be doing, even if it doesn't seem like a large impact. And I feel like this is in discussion as ages old as time, maybe in sustainability, but the more we talk about it, think about it, and practice it, the more that it will grow.
have a question for the from the app?
Yeah, for sure. If there's nobody else from the audience, I'll pose one. This one's addressed to Shagufa. You discussed consumer durable goods recycling and landfill numbers. What about the reuse/thrift sector? What is the role of life extension in this discussion?
I think we'll need many hours to discuss that. I think the land use definitely a problem. The amount that we put in the landfill, it is real estate that we are blocking. Clearly that needs to be solved. And recycling, although I think recycling is a good thing in the current system. But if we were to change how we do it from the design perspective, right at the start, recycling would not be so much of a problem by the time we reach that system. So thinking at the design stage where we are no more thinking about end of life as a disposable, but bringing it back into the circular system, which is why we have to think more than just end of life, that where does it go into recycling? Is it going to go to the landfill? Are we going to burn it? That's a very last stage thinking. And that is why we need to change the thinking, which is what we're trying to do, is how can we design this, even if it is modular, in such a way that it is designed in a way that it comes back into the system and becomes a design component, not having to go into a landfill and become a land use issue. So I think really, whether it is textiles, whether it's consumer durable goods, whether they're tires, and Cal Tire here is working on that. So the innovation really has to be more about how can we do this proactively in a very methodical manner that doesn't let us go to that Band-Aid and now we have land blocked for this waste. I think that's really how we need to start thinking about it and bring the systems perspective on that.
And Shigufa, selling the use instead of the product themselves, is it the best way to avoid waste at the end of the cycle?
Sorry?
I mean, the economy of functionality. I mean, selling the usage instead of the products. I mean, is there a way to avoid garbage at the end of the cycle?
I think we will always have to keep the function and the price in mind. Innovation cannot do away with function and price. So you can have a great bio-based product and bioplastic if it cannot do what is comparable in the market today or has the function. It needs to do what the function is. So the functional unit is very, very important. And the price will, of course, be important. It's the economies of scale that will change the price, 100%. But I think we need to keep those in mind when we innovate. So it is not an either-or situation. It is the situation with all those things in mind.
I can add to that. If you look at electric vehicle batteries, each manufacturer, each car manufacturer has got their own proprietary information about how they put that battery together, and they do not want to share. And I was at Cerba Solutions the other day, and they opened a crate with one EV battery. They're huge. And they did not know, they know the address where it comes from. They know the company where it comes from. They do not know the composition of the battery. They don't know out of which car it comes from. So that really makes the recycling process of that much more difficult, because they have to figure that out first before they can put it in the crusher and guess what's going to come out at the end of the day.
You dropped your mic.
Your
mic.
Where's your mic?
On the ground, okay, here.
It's over.
There we go.
Okay, last question, a quick one. What opportunities do you see for replicating your initiative within the province or somewhere else in Canada? Well, elsewhere in Canada, so, sorry.
We can go under.
Sure.
Yeah.
Quickly.
So with our program, the COIL project is spinning out of the city, and there's an application for more funding now in with FedDev through Innovation Guelph. But we're also talking to Halifax Partnership and Vancouver Economic Commission about how we can create COIL hubs in other parts of the country to really create a national circular economy innovation network across the country that can learn and share from each other. And we actually all work together on a national construction demolition challenge this summer. So I think hopefully some of that we'll be able to spin out and keep going.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll say quickly, I think these labs are really scalable at different sectors, and then the network of labs is definitely scalable from one province to another, and then also, the federal level, and then we can keep on dreaming. But yeah, it's definitely scalable and should be.
I think for our part, it's very specialized in terms of the industrial circular economy that we do and the companies that we have there, but the concept can be duplicated. What makes you special? What's unique to what you do? That type of thing those were the questions that we asked right at the beginning, and that's what we based this on.
I think we're speaking the same language in terms of frameworks or roadmaps, et cetera. And then we also heard about the circular economy, circularity ISO standards that we're looking at. So they all have a role in giving us a common framework to work within, and that allows it for it to be scalable. So where all the work that we do is with the intention of scaling it up. And I think that with these networks, frameworks, and this coordination that we're trying to do is so that it can be scaled up. And definitely these are scalable and applicable to different communities. But clearly one size fits all is not the way to go. Using the framework, you have to be able to be flexible enough to look at where it needs to be applied in an equitable way. And that is exactly what I think what we're trying to do here will be.
Yeah, and I would say when you find a project or something that happened that excites you, that you want to see what that might look like, just talk to people about it and try to figure it out. I mean, conversations with David around COIL aren't like copy-paste COIL into Vancouver. It's like, what from this was successful and what would that look like within the context of Vancouver? Because all solutions do need to be place-based, but we can learn a lot from what's already happened.
So cooperation, collaboration is the key. So thank you very much to all panelists.